On Christmas Eve, my father kicked me out at 17 over a stolen $45,000 Rolex I never touched. 4 years later, Grandpa revealed the truth. And while my family faced eviction, divorce, public humiliation, and made me the sole heir to everything they tried to steal. Hey Reddit, my dad threw me out on Christmas Eve for something I didn't do. I built a life without him and thought I'd left it all behind. But my family's lies and greed came crashing down years later. Before we get there, let me start from the beginning. My name is Celestine P. Coleman. I'm 21, and tonight I'm driving back to the town I swore I'd never see again. 4 years ago, my family kicked me out on Christmas Eve. Today, I'm heading home for my grandfather Albert's 75th birthday, the first time I'll see my parents and Anne since that night. The highway is empty, the sky bruised with winter clouds, and the closer I get, the heavier my chest feels. I'm not that 17-year-old kid anymore. I built a small e-commerce business, earned my independence, and made a life without them. But no amount of success changes how deep that betrayal cut. Back then, the house was chaos long before that night. My mother, Lydia, was obsessed with appearances. Perfect decorations, perfect dinners, perfect lies. My sister Anne was the golden child, spoiled, dramatic, and cruel in ways only siblings can be. If I breathed wrong, she mocked me. If I stayed quiet, she called me useless. Lydia always backed her up. My father, Stephen, was a powerful attorney who terrified judges and bulldozed opponents. Yet at home, he was silent. Instead of setting boundaries, he let them run the show. If Lydia said I was lazy, he agreed. If Anne said I was a disappointment, he looked away. I learned to live around them, not with them. I spent most of that December buried in scholarship applications, scraping together ideas for a small online business that I hoped would get me out of that house. Late at night, when the house was asleep, I'd slip into Stephen's office to print forms and do research. It was the only place with a working printer and a decent Wi-Fi connection. Christmas Eve arrived cold and brittle. The tree was glowing in the corner. The house filled with the smell of cinnamon and pine. Lydia was in hostess mode, barking orders and polishing wine glasses like the Pope was coming for dinner. Anne paraded around in a designer coat she demanded as a holiday essential, snapping selfies in front of the fireplace. I stayed out of the way, trying to help where I could and counting the hours until the day ended. Then Stephen called me into the living room. "Where is it?" His voice wasn't raised, but there was something dangerous behind it. "Where's what?" I asked, confused. "My watch," he snapped. "The Rolex GMT Master 2, white gold, the one your grandfather gave me when I made partner. $45,000, Celestine. It's gone." I blinked. I don't know anything about it. Lydia let out a laugh, sharp and humorless. "Of course you don't. That's always your answer, acting like you're too busy with your little projects to notice anything." "I haven't done anything," I said. "I've been—" "Don't lie," Anne cut in. "I saw you in Dad's office last week by his drawer, probably planning this." "I was printing out a scholarship application," I said, my voice tight. "I didn't touch anything." Lydia folded her arms, the perfect image of mock concern. "You've been sneaking around for weeks. Desperate, secretive. It's obvious what you did." "Desperate for what?" I asked, the anger creeping in. "You've never cared what I do. You just want someone to blame." Stephen stepped closer, looming over me. "This isn't about blame. That watch means more to me than you'll ever understand. And now it's gone." "I didn't take it." My voice broke from frustration. "I didn't even know it was missing until now." "Liar." Lydia's voice was cold. "You've been a disappointment since the day you were born. This is just proof." Anne let out a cruel laugh. "Told you, Dad. She's probably trying to sell it to fund one of her fake business ideas." That was it. Something inside me cracked. "You have no idea what I'm trying to do," I said, staring at them. "I'm trying to make something of myself. I'm trying to be better than this." Stephen's eyes hardened. "Don't raise your voice at me. You've embarrassed this family for the last time." "I didn't do anything," I shouted. "You're accusing me of something I didn't—" Before I could finish, Stephen turned to his desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the empty Rolex box. He threw it across the room. It hit the wall beside me and fell to the floor. "Get out," he said, voice low and final. "Pack your things. Leave this house. You're not part of this family anymore." The Christmas tree lights blinked in the corner. Carols played faintly from the stereo. Outside, snow was beginning to fall. And in the middle of it all, my father stood there. Not as a man I loved or respected, but as someone who had decided I was no longer worth claiming. "You're making a mistake," I whispered. "The mistake," Lydia hissed, "was letting you stay this long." Anne smirked, arms folded. "Merry Christmas." I didn't say another word. I walked upstairs, packed a single duffel bag with my clothes and laptop, and walked out the front door. The door slammed behind me before I reached the driveway. The porch light flicked off as if they couldn't bear to see me go. It was Christmas Eve. I had $60 in my pocket, no place to sleep, and no one in that house who cared whether I froze in the snow. That was the night everything ended, and the night I swore they would never have power over me again. Snow was falling hard by the time I reached the end of the street. The lights from my house glowed warm behind me, muffled Christmas music leaking through the walls, a celebration I was no longer part of. My hands were numb, the straps of the duffel bag digging into my shoulder. The cold was sharp, but it wasn't what hurt. What hurt was that they'd done it tonight, on Christmas Eve. Every house I passed looked like a postcard. Families gathered around dinner tables. Children tore into presents. Through frosted windows, I saw smiles, laughter, warmth. I felt like a ghost drifting past someone else's life. My breath fogged in the air, and every inhale burned. I didn't know where to go. I scrolled through my phone and sent a message to Eli, a classmate I'd done a few group projects with. Got kicked out. "Any chance I can crash tonight?" He replied within minutes. "Come by." His family lived in a small townhouse on the other side of town. By the time I got there, my shoes were soaked through and my fingers stung. Eli opened the door, wearing a Santa hat and holding a plate of cookies. Behind him, his family was gathered in the living room, watching a Christmas movie. The smell of roast turkey and cinnamon filled the air. "Celestine, what happened?" he asked. "Long story," I muttered. "Can I just crash on the couch?" "Yeah, of course," he said, stepping aside. His parents appeared a moment later, polite but wary. "Celestine, right?" his dad asked. "Rough night?" "Something like that." They let me in, but I could feel the discomfort. They spoke to each other in hushed tones when they thought I couldn't hear. I ate a plate of food they offered, but their eyes kept drifting toward me, a stranger in the middle of their holiday. When they exchanged gifts, I sat quietly on the couch staring at the floor. It was better than freezing outside, but it wasn't home. I left the next morning before anyone was awake. I thanked Eli in a text and told him I'd figure something out. The weeks that followed blurred together. I bounced from one friend's couch to another, 3 nights here, 4 nights there, always careful not to overstay my welcome. At first, people were sympathetic. They offered meals, blankets, even advice. But sympathy doesn't last forever. By the 2nd or 3rd week, the hints started. "We're having family visits soon. I need my space back." By mid-January, I was out of places to stay. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and the cold cut deeper than anything I'd felt before. I spent nights in bus stations, public libraries, and once behind a gas station, curled up with my duffel bag as a pillow. I skipped meals to make the cash I had stretch longer. I applied for part-time jobs, but without experience, most places rejected me before the interview. 3 weeks after being kicked out, I decided to return to the house, not to speak to anyone, just to grab my old laptop from the garage. It was my only tool for scholarship applications and job searches. I waited until evening, hoping no one would see me. They did. Before I could reach the side door, a police cruiser pulled into the driveway. Officer Reed stepped out, his breath visible in the cold. "You Celestine?" he asked. "Yeah." "Your mother says you're trespassing." "I'm not. I used to live here. I just came to get my laptop." "How old are you?" Reed asked. 17. He sighed. "Technically, they're still responsible for you. But if you don't want to go back, I'm not going to drag you inside. I'll flag CPS and try to reach a relative. Just don't come back here. They're not going to change." "I just need—" "What you need," he interrupted gently, "is to stop trying to fix something that's already broken. If you want a future, you build it without them." He let me walk away without charges. I never went back. A week later, I was sitting in the public library using a free computer when a woman tapped me on the shoulder. I turned, and for a second, I didn't recognize her. Marianne, my father's older sister. I hadn't seen her in nearly 5 years. "Officer Reed pulled my number from a prior report and called me as soon as he could," she said. "Told me what happened. I knew your parents were selfish, but throwing you out on Christmas Eve?" She shook her head. "You're coming with me." Marianne had always kept her distance from Lydia and Anne, calling them snakes in designer shoes. When she heard I was on the streets, she showed up at the library where I'd been spending my days and offered me a room. It wasn't charity. Marianne made it clear. If I stayed, I'd have to pull my weight. Within a week, she got me a part-time job at a small auto garage. The work was tough, long hours, grease under my nails, aching muscles, but I didn't complain. It was a lifeline. I started saving every cent. A month later, I bought a rusted, barely running used car for a few hundred. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and more importantly, it was a roof when I needed one. When Marianne's spare room wasn't available, or I had late shifts, I'd park behind a 24-hour grocery store and sleep there. The grind became my routine. Garage shifts during the day, delivery gigs at night. On breaks, I taught myself coding and digital marketing using free online courses. Every cruel comment Lydia and Anne posted online about their vacations, luxury dinners, family Christmas photos added fuel to the fire. Anne once wrote, "The house feels lighter without dead weight." She meant it as a jab. I took it as motivation. By spring, I'd saved enough to launch a small e-commerce site. It barely made sales, but it was a start, proof that I could build something. A few months later, I landed a competitive tech scholarship. It felt like the first real victory I'd ever earned on my own. One night, months later, I walked past my old neighborhood on my way home from a delivery. The houses were glowing again, music spilling into the street. I stopped across from my family's house. The windows were lit, laughter echoing from inside. The same warmth I'd once watched from the outside. I stood there for a moment, then zipped my jacket and walked away. They chose to throw me out. I was choosing never to go back. 4 years later, I was back to celebrate Grandpa's 75th birthday. The invitation had surprised me. I hadn't spoken to most of my family since the day I left. My father never reached out. Lydia and Anne pretended I didn't exist. But Albert, he was different. Even after I was gone, he sent birthday cards, sometimes checks, and a handwritten note when I got my scholarship. He was the only one who treated me like I still mattered. When his card arrived with a handwritten line, "I'd like you there. Please come," I knew I couldn't refuse. The driveway was full when I arrived. Expensive cars lined the curb, the kind Lydia loved to name drop. The house looked exactly the same. Same porch light, same wreath, same warm glow through the windows. Nothing had changed, except me. I parked down the street and sat in the car for a moment, steadying myself. Then I stepped out, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the door. The moment I stepped inside, the noise hit me. Laughter, clinking glasses, music humming from hidden speakers. A few relatives I barely remembered gave polite nods as I passed. Others stared like they'd seen a ghost. Lydia noticed me first. Her smile vanished. "Well," she said, wine glass in hand. "Look who decided to show up." "Good to see you too," I said evenly. Anne followed, dressed head to toe in designer labels, a fake smile plastered on her face. "I was betting you wouldn't have the nerve," she said. "Guess I owe Mom $20. I ignored the jab and looked for my father. Stephen was standing by the fireplace with a drink in his hand, deep in conversation with one of Albert's friends. He looked up, saw me, and for a second his expression faltered. Then he gave a stiff nod, nothing more. The tension in the room was thick, but I kept my head high. I wasn't the kid they'd humiliated anymore. I'd built my life from nothing, and I wasn't here to impress them. "Celestine," a voice called behind me. It was Ellen, Albert's attorney and oldest friend. "I'm glad you came." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. She lowered her voice. "Albert's been working on something. Don't leave before the toast." I nodded, not sure what she meant. I spent the next hour avoiding conversations. Lydia introduced Anne to anyone who would listen as an up-and-coming entrepreneur, though I knew from social media that her influencer projects were failing. My father pretended I wasn't there. Every time I passed them, Anne's voice rose just loud enough for me to catch a word. Pathetic. Still bitter. Probably unemployed. I didn't take the bait. I focused on the reason I was there, Albert. It was nearly 9 when the clinking of a spoon against a glass silenced the chatter. Albert stood at the head of the long dining table, his posture straight, his voice strong. "Thank you all for coming," he began. 75 years is a long time to be alive, and I'm grateful to have so much family here tonight." He paused, scanning the room. Then his tone shifted, slower, heavier, deliberate. 4 years ago, something valuable disappeared from this house. A Rolex GMT Master 2, white gold, $45,000. My son's watch. At the time, my granddaughter Celestine was accused of stealing it. She was thrown out, disowned. But as of recently, his voice tightened, I learned the truth. The room stilled. Forks hovered in midair. Lydia's smile faded. By chance, I was speaking with an old friend of mine who runs a pawn shop downtown. I mentioned the watch, just a passing comment, and he froze. He told me that just after Christmas that year, a young woman came into his shop with a matching piece, nervous, shaking, talking too much. A ripple of unease spread across the room. Annie's hands tightened around her glass. I showed him a photo of the missing watch, Albert continued. He didn't hesitate. Same model, same serial and engraving. And the name on the paperwork? He paused, letting the silence stretch. Anne Alvarez. The room erupted in whispers. Lydia's face drained of color. Stephen's hand trembled as he set his drink down. Anne stared at the floor, frozen. Through his records, we traced the serial number to the current holder. After the police contacted them, the watch was returned. But I didn't stop there, Albert said, pacing slowly as if presenting evidence in court. I wanted the whole story, so I asked for help, and we followed the money. $15,000 was wired to a debt collector to pay off a boyfriend's gambling problem. $12,000 more paid for a European vacation, first-class flights, 5-star hotels, champagne brunches, and $10,000 vanished into a cryptocurrency scheme that collapsed in weeks. No one spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. And while all of this was happening, Albert said, his voice rising just slightly, the person you all chose to blame, the one you called a liar and a thief, was trying to survive with nothing. Celestine lost her home, her family, and 4 years of her life because of a story you all never questioned. He turned toward me. Tonight, I want that story corrected. Celestine, you were innocent. You always were. The room was silent. Lydia's lips moved, but no words came out. Stephen stared at the table, unable to look at me. Anne's eyes were glassy with shock, her face pale. I felt a dozen eyes on me, but I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth had been buried for 4 years, and now it was standing naked in the center of the room for everyone to see. I stayed long enough to thank Albert quietly. Then I slipped out before dessert, the cold night air hitting me like a wave. I didn't want to see the fallout. I didn't want apologies. The people inside that house had already shown me who they were. As I walked down the driveway, I realized something had changed. For years, I'd carried the weight of their betrayal like a chain. But now, as snow crunched under my boots and the house faded into the distance behind me, I felt lighter. They had tried to bury me with lies. Tonight, the truth dug me out. I didn't hear from my father for 3 days after Albert's party. Then the messages started. At first, they were full of apologies, long, desperate texts about how he didn't know the whole story, how he regretted everything, how he wanted to make it right. Then they shifted. The tone grew colder, angrier. He accused me of turning Albert against him, of brainwashing the family, of humiliating them in front of their friends. I ignored every single one. Then Albert asked me to meet Stephen. Just once. Against my better judgment, I texted my father an address, a small cafe near the old library where I used to study. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with a half-finished cup of coffee. He looked tired, older than I remembered, but there was still that same intensity in his eyes. The same man who had thrown me out on Christmas Eve now sat in front of me like nothing had happened. Celestine, he said, standing as if we were old friends. Let's just talk, I replied, taking a seat. There was a long pause before he spoke again. I owe you an apology. His voice was low, measured. I was wrong. About the watch, about that night, about a lot of things. I didn't respond. I wanted to hear what else he had to say. I thought I was doing what was best, he continued. I believed what they told me. And when I saw you in my office, I let my anger take over. I failed you as a father. For a moment, I almost believed him, but then his tone shifted. Subtle at first, then sharper. But you have to understand, he said, leaning forward. I was under a lot of pressure. Lydia in one ear, Anne in the other, and I didn't know what to believe. And now you've gone and turned my own father against me. Do you have any idea what that toast did to me? The words hit like a slap. What it did to you, I repeated. It told the truth. That's what it did. He exhaled sharply. You didn't need to make it public. You could have handled this privately. Instead, you humiliated me. humiliated our family. Our family, I scoffed. The same family that called me a thief and threw me out into the snow without a second thought? The same people who ignored me for 4 years while I was sleeping on floors and working 2 jobs to survive? His jaw tightened. Celestine, I'm trying to fix this. No, I said. You're trying to fix how it looks. There's a difference. The conversation turned fast, from calm to confrontational. He slammed his palm lightly on the table. You don't understand what it's like to have everything you've built fall apart because of one mistake. I lost clients. Friends stopped calling. People think I'm a fool. You are a fool, I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. You believed a lie because it was easier than believing me. And now you're paying for it. Watch your tone, he snapped, the old authority creeping back into his voice. No, I said quietly, standing now. I'm done watching my tone. You kicked me out like trash. You let them destroy my name. You didn't even answer my messages when I begged you to hear me out. And now that the truth is out, you're still trying to blame someone else. The silence between us was sharp. People at nearby tables were starting to glance over. Stephen looked around, embarrassed, then leaned in. I'm asking you to move on, he said. We're still family. We can rebuild. Family, I repeated, my voice low. Family protects you. Family listens. Family doesn't throw a 17-year-old out on Christmas Eve without proof. His voice hardened. You're being dramatic. I already said I was sorry. No, I said, turning toward the door. You said you were sorry you got caught, not sorry for what you did. He stood too, his face flushed. You think you're better than me now? Because Albert's giving you money? Because you got a few scholarships? I don't think I'm better than you, I replied. I just know I'll never be like you. Something in his eyes shifted. Anger, pride, maybe even fear. But he didn't stop. One day you'll regret this. One day you'll understand how much I sacrificed. I stared at him for a long moment before answering. You didn't sacrifice anything. You threw away your daughter. I turned and walked toward the door. He called my name, but I didn't look back. Outside, the winter air bit at my face. I should have felt angry, but I didn't. What I felt instead was clarity, cold, unshakable clarity. My father hadn't come to apologize. He'd come to rewrite the story. He wanted forgiveness without accountability, redemption without consequences. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't owe him either. I pulled my phone from my pocket and blocked his number. The cycle ended here. 2 weeks passed after the cafe confrontation. I hadn't heard from my father since the day I walked away, and I thought that might be the end of it. But then Albert called. His voice was calm, but there was something deliberate beneath the surface. I need you to come by the house, he said. There's something we need to talk about privately. When Albert used that tone, it was never small talk. I drove over the next morning, unsure what to expect. He greeted me at the door with a firm handshake and led me into his study, a room that smelled of old books and cedar, lined with decades of family history. On the table in front of him were several folders, each thick with documents. What's all this? I asked. Evidence, Hirai, he replied, and a very big problem. Albert explained that after the truth about the watch came out, he couldn't shake the feeling there was more beneath the surface. The way Lydia and Anne had manipulated my father so easily, the way they lied without hesitation, it had left him unsettled. So, he started digging. It began with a review of the family company's financial records. At first, everything looked fine. Then inconsistencies started showing up. Small withdrawals here, unaccounted transfers there. The deeper he went, the uglier it became. Over the course of 3 years, hundreds of thousands of dollars had quietly disappeared from company and personal accounts. Lydia had been issuing company credit cards in her name, charging them with business expenses that were actually designer handbags, spa treatments, and private chauffeurs. Anne had been funneling company funds into side ventures, failed influencer projects, expensive vacations, even a short-lived clothing brand that collapsed in months. And that wasn't the worst of it. Albert opened another folder and slid a document across the desk. It was a loan agreement, a substantial one taken out under Stephen's name, but the signature wasn't his. Forged? I asked. Albert nodded. Your mother signed it. She used the money to bail Anne out of a crypto scheme gone bad. $500,000 gone in a single night. I stared at the paperwork. It wasn't just greed. It was calculated betrayal. They hadn't just destroyed trust. They had been bleeding the family dry while blaming everyone else for their mess. Then Albert leaned back and added something that caught me off guard. And you asked me once why Anne ever pawned the Rolex in the first place. If they were capable of stealing so much, why bother with that? I nodded. The question had haunted me for years. Because that happened before all of this, Albert said. At the time, they didn't have access to company accounts. Lydia wasn't part of the business yet, and Anne didn't know how to move money without getting caught. They needed fast, untraceable cash, and they needed it immediately. He flipped another page showing bank statements. Her boyfriend was deep in debt, not credit card debt, the dangerous kind. Loan sharks, threats. They needed tens of thousands of dollars within days. The company funds were too risky to touch then. Too many eyes, too much paper trail. But your father's Rolex? She could pawn it that afternoon and walk out with cash before anyone noticed. It made perfect sense. The watch theft hadn't been part of a grand plan. It was panic, a desperate, impulsive move before they grew bolder and turned their crimes into something much larger. What about my father? I asked quietly. He's clueless, Albert said. Or maybe he chose not to see it. Either way, he let them run wild. And now they've nearly destroyed everything I built. I leaned back in the chair. What are you going to do? Albert's expression hardened. I'm cutting them off. All of them. He wasn't speaking figuratively. Over the next hour, Albert laid out his plan. His lawyers were already restructuring the family trust. My father's name was being removed as a beneficiary. Every asset, real estate, shares, bonds, would bypass him entirely. The money that was supposed to sustain him in retirement? Gone. Lydia and Anne wouldn't see a cent. They had their chance, Albert said, and they proved they can't be trusted with the legacy of this family. I didn't know what to say. It was a monumental decision, not just a punishment, but a final judgment. There's one more thing, Albert added, his tone softening. I'm setting aside a portion of the estate for you, not because you're entitled to it, but because you've earned it. You've shown integrity when everyone else around you showed greed. I shook my head. I didn't do any of this for money. I know, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. That's exactly why you deserve it. The fallout was immediate. Within days, word spread that Albert had rewritten his will. Lydia was furious. She called Albert's attorney repeatedly, threatening lawsuits and demanding meetings. None of it mattered. The paperwork was airtight. Anne spiraled. Her credit cards were frozen, her accounts drained, her ventures collapsing. One night, she sent me a long, rambling message online begging for help. She said she'd been pressured into everything, that she never meant for it to go this far, that she was just trying to protect the family. I deleted it without replying. My father was worse. Even after I blocked his main number, he kept calling from new ones. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails swinging between rage and desperation. In one, he shouted that I'd turned Albert against his own son. In another, he begged me to talk. I didn't respond. In under 2 weeks, Albert called again. It's done, he said simply. The trust is finalized. They're cut off. I asked how my father took it. He's furious, Albert said. But he still doesn't see why it's happening. He blames everyone but himself. Lydia's talking divorce, and Anne's drowning in debt. A week after Albert finalized the trust, the shockwaves began. At first, nothing obvious changed. Just a shift in tone when my father's name came up. Calls stopped being returned, meetings were rescheduled, and people he once called friends suddenly became too busy. It was the kind of silence that always comes before everything falls apart. Within 2 weeks, the first cracks appeared. Word of the trust changes had reached his law firm, and whispers spread through the legal community. An internal audit followed. It was called routine, but everyone knew why it was happening. Investigators dug into records, and soon enough, patterns started to emerge. Unauthorized transfers, unapproved expenses, missing funds. Nothing had gone public yet, but the writing was on the wall. By the second month, the situation exploded. The media caught wind, and the headlines were brutal. Top attorney's family, linked to financial misconduct. Investigation launched into Coleman and Associates Holdings. Every detail of their scheme came to light. Lydia's name was tied to embezzlement. Anne's influencer brand was exposed as a shell company, and my father's reputation, built over decades, was shredded in days. The firm suspended him pending investigation. State regulators opened a case. Clients cut ties. People he once mentored wouldn't return his calls. The man who once terrified courtrooms suddenly had no one in his corner. The third month was worse. Creditors called daily. Accounts were frozen. Sponsorships vanished. Annie's projects collapsed, one after another. Lydia's carefully curated image crumbled. Charity galas, high society dinners, exclusive circles, gone. Around that time, Albert's lawyers started the process of reclaiming the family home. It would take time, but the outcome was inevitable. By the 5th month, humiliation became public. When the eviction notice arrived, Anne completely lost it. She stormed onto Albert's property, screaming that he was destroying the family. Albert listened quietly before cutting her off with a single sentence. Family doesn't forge signatures. Family doesn't drain accounts or frame their own blood. This is the result of your choices. The house went on the market weeks later. Annie's luxury SUV was repossessed. Lydia was photographed shouting at debt collectors, and the pictures went viral. The family that had obsessed over appearances had become a public spectacle. Anne tried one last time to salvage her image. She launched a second chance rebrand online, crying on camera about growth and learning from mistakes. It failed instantly. Sponsors vanished, followers disappeared, and she quietly deleted everything. Lydia fared no better. With no money and no one willing to associate with her, she faded from the social world she once ruled. By the 6th month, Lydia filed for divorce. She accused Stephen of emotional neglect and betrayal, hoping for a payout. But Albert's lawyers had sealed every loophole. The accounts were frozen, the trust was untouchable, and there was nothing left for her to win. Stephen's professional life was over too. No firm would hire him. His name was toxic. The man who once preached control now had none. He left me a voicemail I never answered. She left, he said quietly. I gave them everything. I listened once before deleting it. He still didn't understand. He had given them everything, instead of me, and now he had nothing. By the 8th month, they were unrecognizable. Anne was working retail for minimum wage. Lydia was selling overpriced skincare online. Stephen, stripped of wealth and reputation, was living alone in a small, run-down apartment. I saw him once by accident in a grocery store. He looked older and smaller, like the weight of every decision he'd made had finally crushed him. He tried to speak, but I kept walking. There was nothing left to say. Albert seemed lighter when we spoke. It was hard to watch, he admitted one afternoon, but sometimes the only way to stop rot is to let it collapse under its own weight. He was right. Neither of us had destroyed them. We hadn't needed to. They had done it to themselves, one selfish decision at a time. Their downfall wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, humiliating, and final. And for the first time since I was 17, I wasn't angry anymore. I was free. Life after their collapse was quiet, almost unnervingly so. For the first time in years, there were no angry messages, no manipulation, no guilt trips, just silence. And in that silence, I began building a life that had nothing to do with them. I cut off every point of contact, changed my number, stopped checking the old email, and told relatives I didn't want updates. It wasn't about revenge. I just didn't want their chaos bleeding into the future I was trying to create. Work became my focus. The degree I'd fought for finally paid off, and I moved quickly through the ranks at a cybersecurity firm. I led projects, hired my own team, and earned the respect I'd once begged for. Every milestone felt like proof that I had built something entirely on my own. I traveled too, not to escape, but to live. From the temples of Kyoto to the mountains of Patagonia, every new place reminded me how far I'd come from that night. The girl who once sat in her freezing car on Christmas Eve now stood in places she'd only dreamed of, writing her own story. Albert and I grew closer. He wasn't just my grandfather anymore. He was my anchor. We spoke often about the future of the family business, and for the first time, I was part of that future. They tried to break you, he told me one evening, but you built yourself stronger than they ever were. He was right. Almost a year later, a letter arrived. It was from my father. The handwriting alone stopped me cold. Inside, he admitted everything. The betrayal, the lies, the blindness, and said the words I once thought I'd never hear. I'm sorry. He wrote about how Lydia had remarried and left without a word, how Anne barely spoke to him, how empty life had become. He said he wished he could go back and change it all. I read it twice, then put it away. I didn't respond. Not because I hated him, but because I no longer needed anything from him. Not an apology, not a conversation, not a relationship. I'd already forgiven him in my own way. Forgiveness wasn't for him, it was for me. That winter, Albert and I hosted a small holiday dinner. Marianne came with her husband, a few cousins, and close friends. The house was warm. filled with laughter and the kind of peace I used to think didn't exist for people like me. At one point, Marianne raised her glass and said, "Here's to second chances, the ones we give ourselves." Her words stayed with me, because my story was never about revenge. It was about rebuilding after being broken. It was about proving that other people's choices didn't define who I became. I haven't spoken to my father since that letter. Maybe one day I will, maybe I won't. If I do, it will be on my terms, not his. The girl he threw out on Christmas Eve is gone. What's left is a woman who built her life without their approval, who learned that family isn't blood. It's loyalty. It's love. It's the people who show up when everyone else walks away. And that woman, the one they tried to destroy, is finally free. The years that followed were quiet, but not empty. I kept growing the company I'd started as a teenager, turning it from a side project into a thriving business. I learned to invest, to manage, to mentor others who had been cast aside by their own families. My team became my second home, my own version of the family I had always wanted. Every December, Albert and I had a ritual. We'd drive into the city, stop by the same bakery, and order his favorite gingerbread loaf. Then we'd sit on a park bench overlooking the river and watch the lights reflect on the water. He'd tell me stories about his youth, his mistakes, his victories, the love he lost and found again with my grandmother. He told me once, "The world will always test your integrity, Celestine, but you'll never lose what you built honestly." He passed away 2 years later, peacefully in his sleep. He was 78. His funeral was small, elegant, and private, just the way he wanted it. I delivered the eulogy, and for the first time in my life, I spoke in front of the entire family, not as the black sheep they'd thrown away, but as the one who carried his name forward. After the service, Albert's lawyer met with me and Marianne. When he handed me the envelope, I already knew what it was. Albert had left everything to me. The trust, the properties, the business, everything. Marianne smiled softly. "He always said you'd be the one to keep it alive." For a moment, the weight of it was overwhelming. I didn't feel pride. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt peace. Because what I had built with Albert wasn't about inheritance. It was about redemption. A few weeks later, I received another letter, this time from Anne. It was short, handwritten on cheap stationery. "Celestine, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. You didn't deserve what I did. None of it. I've lost everything. My home, my marriage, my reputation. But I guess I needed to lose it all to realize what I had. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you're happy. Anne." I stared at it for a long time before folding it neatly and putting it in a drawer. It was more than I ever expected and far too late to matter. But there was something strangely freeing in reading her words, not because I forgave her, but because I didn't have to hate her anymore. Lydia never reached out. She married a wealthy man 15 years her senior and moved to Florida, where she lived out her life pretending none of it ever happened. She built new lies on top of old ones, a queen without a kingdom. I heard through a distant cousin that she'd started attending church again, talking about finding peace. Maybe she did. Or maybe she just needed another audience to applaud her act. Stephen, my father, spent his final years quietly. His name had faded from the public eye. I read in a small obituary 5 years after Albert's passing that he had died alone in his apartment. No service, no photos, just a name, 2 lines, and an ending. I didn't cry, but I didn't smile either. I just closed the tab on my laptop and whispered goodbye. It was strange how life had come full circle. The people who had once stood above me had fallen, and not because I pushed them, but because of who they chose to be. And I, the girl they once cast out into the cold, had built everything they thought I never could. It wasn't revenge that healed me. It was forgiveness, the kind you give yourself when you finally stop letting the past dictate your worth. Last Christmas Eve, I went back to Albert's property, my property now. I stood outside the old house, looking up at the lights strung along the eaves, the same ones that had glowed that night when I was 17. The snow was falling gently, covering the driveway in white. The house was quiet now, peaceful. I took a deep breath and whispered to the girl I used to be, "You made it," because she had. She survived being thrown out into the cold, survived betrayal, survived the weight of other people's lies, and turned every scar into something stronger. The house that had once been the site of my humiliation was now a monument to my resilience. I turned off the porch light, locked the door, and walked away. Not because I was running from the past, but because I had finally outgrown it. When I got home, I poured a cup of tea and opened my laptop to draft a message for the new year. It was for my company's blog, but it could have been written for anyone who's ever been broken by people they loved. You can lose everything: money, family, reputation, and still come out stronger. You can be betrayed and still choose not to become bitter. You can start again from nothing and build a life that's completely your own. Forgive when you can, let go when you must, and never let someone else's blindness convince you that you're unworthy of light. That's the truth I live by now. Because once upon a time, they threw me out into the cold. And that's where I learned how to build my own fire.